Hi, I'm Dr. Skeleman. A quick disclaimer before I begin. I think that everyone who wants a home should have a home. A lot of the time, economists look down on people who study economics and have goals and beliefs like this. They call people like me normative. This is dumb and they are dumb. This is like a bunch of biologists talking about how it would be better if the coronavirus didn't kill people, and here are some things that we can do to mitigate the deaths. And then a bunch of other biologists said, you have to stop being so normative. Lunacy. But lunacy is a hallmark of the practitioners of the dismal science. My mindset in this video is that of a biologist trying to stop COVID. I'm going to use what I know to get the outcome that I want. And I am somewhat more qualified than most on the internet in this area, as I actually have an academic background in the scientific study of economics. Marginal utility economics, too. Quick review. There are currently around 560,000 people who are homeless on any given night. These are men, women, NBs, and children who are sleeping either in communal shelters, or in cars, or on the street somewhere instead of houses. 560,000 is a lot of people. That's about the population of the state of Wyoming, which gets 2 senators in DC and 3 electoral votes in the race for president. Put another way, that would be the number of people homeless if the entire city of Atlanta were destroyed in a hurricane. Current strategies for dealing with this large number of families and individuals who have no guaranteed place to sleep each night largely falls on a local community's churches and something called hostile architecture. Hostile architecture means putting random bars in the middle of benches and little bumps, or sometimes spikes, on areas where homeless people would find safe, dry, or comfortable places to sleep so that their lives are made worse, but so that you don't see them. I'm sure it makes everyone a proud member of their community when the local government allows businesses, and sometimes even spends tax dollars themselves, to worsen the lives of homeless people because it's cheaper than actually fixing the problem, but looks the same to anyone walking down the street. Now let's see how I'm going to create houses for all these people to live in. And he said, "Let there be housing." And there was housing. Alright, that should do it. Let's see how many houses I made. Looks like there are now about 16 million vacant houses in the US. That's roughly 29 houses for every homeless person. So I may have overdone it a bit back there, but whatever, problem solved. All sarcasm aside, those numbers aren't made up. There are 16 million empty homes in the United States and only 560,000 homeless people. This seems very strange. Why would people be building homes that no one could live in? Why? This problem gets even weirder when you look at the cities that are famous for their lack of housing. San Francisco is the first one that comes to mind for me, and it has 11,760 empty homes. Something doesn't seem to be adding up here. Why are the homes built if no one could live in them? Why? We're going to get back to this later, but for a quick rundown, see the end of this video, and for a much fuller explanation, see The Big Short, both the book and the movie. Some people on the internet have made videos about the topic of the housing market, but they're all wrong. Like Ollie from PhilosophyTube, but he's too much of a snack for me to get angry with him. Dear Ollie, I know you don't know me, but I know you. I know it's all parasocial, but every time you pour HP on your fucking I Ollie, you So people really like to model stuff using supply and demand in a model known as perfect competition, or the free market. Really often, people don't know the scientific definition and they use it as a synonym for capitalism or something. Capitalism has nothing to do with markets, actually. It's just when the people who create whatever output a firm sells do not own the firm itself. The free market is actually a technical term for a specific model that has 7 key assumptions in it that, if all true, produce the outcome where the number of goods supplied equals the number of goods demanded, and a price results from these 2 factors. What a good economist does is learn this model, understand its 7 assumptions, and then look out into the real world to see which assumptions aren't true for any particular market, so that they can better use the model to advocate policy.
So, Minister, we've run every viable model through the computer, and it looks like there just are no easy solutions to this recession.
Have you tried kill all the poor?
Chemistry students often have to do something similar with the ideal gas law. The assumptions of this law are that gas molecules have no intermolecular forces and take up zero space, so the actual behavior of molecules which are large or interact with each other a lot would deviate from the prediction of this model, but in predictable ways. People who talk about how much they love free markets don't ever actually read or study the models, just like how no leftist has ever actually read Marx or no capitalist has ever read Adam Smith.
You gotta do it, you gotta read it.
With all of this in mind, let's see what assumptions of the free market that the housing market violates so that we can get a better understanding of how the market is actually working in the real world. Most important is the assumption of homogeneous products, or in English, a free market model assumes that all goods are identical to each other in every way. Pretty obviously this is just not true. In fact, there are probably thousands of housing markets, one for each type of house in each type of location. I'll put up on screen a quick summary of the other assumptions which are violated if you're interested. To get around this assumption to model markets like the housing market, and even stuff as large as the entire economy, economists often just group everything together. They say that people are buying and selling some vague average house, or some aggregated bundle of house-like things, and that this is a good model for the market. You can argue with them about how appropriate this is, but I think trying to staple water to a tree would be a quicker way to get a deep understanding of futility.
Owned, or however you say that.
I propose that a more useful model is one with two main housing markets, one for homes that people buy to live in, and one for homes which people buy to hold on to and hopefully sell later for a profit. It just so happens that all of the houses sold in the buy and hold market, which I'm going to call the investment market, is also something that people could live in, i.e., a house. Think about how the market for copies of Atlas Shrugged and the market for toilet paper are different things, even though one can be used as the other. Let's use my modified model to see if it can explain the world we see. Spoiler alert, it's super gonna. But first we need to talk about the model most economics articles use, where there is just one market.
President Obama was constantly chewing gum. And then on top of that, he took it out of his mouth, put it back. You can't do it. It's disgusting.
Like I said, before we get into the Dr. Skeleman housing market model, we need to make sure we understand the model used in all those news articles where rich men in suits with PhDs from Ivy League universities think they know what it's like to be a homeless poor person without a high school degree. The x-axis is the number of homes, and the y-axis is the price of each one. For any given price, there are a number of houses which will be supplied. People can make money building houses and selling them after all. As houses get more expensive, then people will be willing to build more houses, so the supply curve looks like this. The opposite is true of the demand curve. The point where these two lines intersect is called the equilibrium, and it's every economist's waifu. The supply and demand lines represent potential amounts being produced and bought, and the actual amount is at the intersection. All the homes are priced the same. Notice something though, this intersection does not mean that everyone who wants or needs a home has one. An economist would still call this efficient, using the economic definition of the word though. To understand why, we need to know what economists mean when they say efficient. They mean Pareto efficiency. A Pareto efficient scenario is one where you can't make someone better off without making someone else worse off. Economists love Pareto efficiency because they're idiots. They think it's what Adam Smith was talking about with his invisible hand analogy, despite the fact that Pareto was born 58 years after Smith died, and Smith was actually full of shit. In reality, Pareto efficiency is not worth striving for. If one person has twice as much food as they need to survive, and another has none, the outcome where they each have exactly as much food they need isn't Pareto efficient. In fact, if we had bread to hand out, there are multiple Pareto efficient outcomes, one of which is just giving all of the bread to the person who already has it, and another is giving it to the person who doesn't have any. Economists think Pareto efficiency lets them be objective. They are wrong. But anyway, back to the model. So, we can still have homeless people in this model, even when there is no extra supply. That would be the case if our equilibrium point were here. If it were down here, then we would have no homeless people. But that's not what we see in the real world. We have a surplus of housing. a quite large one in fact, and we still have homeless people. So what would that look like in our model? Let's first talk about everyone's favorite solution to rising housing prices, rent control. Rent control is a legally mandated maximum price for rent. Economists call this a price ceiling, and they really hate them. But just like all things economists hate, it's probably actually fine. Imagine that we as a society think that this equilibrium price is too high.
Rent, it's too damn high.
And we say no one can charge more than this much for a house. Well, now we're not at an equilibrium point. There's a mismatch here. At that price, this many people will want to buy homes, but only this many people will be willing to supply them. For this reason, economists in the newspaper
Says here in the newspaper
will tell you how rent control will only serve to worsen the housing shortage. But we're smarter than that. We know that there isn't a housing shortage. So where did these economists go wrong? They made a false assumption. Economists love doing this as well. They assumed that we were at an equilibrium point. But we've got a 29-to-1 ratio of empty homes to homeless, so obviously we are not at an equilibrium. What's probably the case is that the homes are overvalued. If that were true, and the price of homes were above the equilibrium, then we would still have homeless people, but we would also have an excess of supply. In this world, rent control would work to push us back toward the equilibrium, housing more people in the process and decreasing the surplus. Again, in a world of 29-to-1 empty houses to homeless, it's hard to argue that this isn't the case. Remember though, the equilibrium point doesn't mean that there are no homeless people. What we actually have to do is to try to move the equilibrium as far right as we can. But we don't have to. We could just give houses to homeless people. If every man, woman, NB, and child were given a house, the supply of extra housing would only go down by about 3%. That's like wanting to withdraw $100 from an ATM and having to pay $3 because it isn't the one owned by your bank.
When our cause is all triumphant and we claim our Mother Earth.
But this solution isn't perfect. A lot of these empty homes, like we said, aren't built for people to live in. They were built as investments. This means that maintenance costs and property taxes
I went to H&R Block with a raging hard cock, slammed it on the desk and said, "Suck."
would be quite high. Unfortunately, most homeless people are also quite poor, so this doesn't seem like the best option. Let's switch gears and go to the Dr. Skellerman market model now.
House is free! The house is free! It's a free house!
It's free real estate.
Remember, we have two markets, the market where people buy homes to live in and the market where people buy homes to invest in. Let's start with the market for people who want to live in the home that they buy and actually, use it like a house. The buyers in this market will only ever buy one house. We are talking about the homeless here, not retired people who need a house in Florida for the winter. In contrast, the buyers in the investment market will buy more than one house. But for now, we don't care about this market. We want to fix this market. There are two ways that we could make the equilibrium be at the point where there are no homeless people.
Have you tried kill all the poor?
Both of them involve a subsidy. We could subsidize the supply side or subsidize the demand side. It actually turns out that regardless of which side we give the subsidy to, the benefits of the subsidy will end up being split the same way. It's not like giving money to suppliers is somehow cheating the buyers. If you want to find out why, I will link an explanation in the description. Let's subsidize the supply side, with the added caveat that any single person is disqualified from purchasing a home built with the subsidy if they already own a home. This will prevent people from taking advantage of the cheap housing by buying literally everyone that is for sale and then having a monopoly on the supply of houses. Because of our subsidy, it is now relatively cheaper to build a house, so the supply line is going to shift to the right. What this means in real-world terms is that it is now profitable for companies to build homes and sell them at a price that homeless or impoverished people can afford. And there are now prices at which it was previously unprofitable to build homes that have become profitable. Notice that our equilibrium price, the price which people actually pay to buy a home, is also decreasing as we shift the curve. If we subsidize it enough, then eventually we will meet our desired point. In fact, it would be best if we subsidized a bit more to be on the safe side. There is going to be some margin of error in the real world, and we would prefer it be that too many homes were built rather than too few, since our goal is to eliminate homelessness. People on the news will of course talk about how this is a fault in the system and we shouldn't have done anything in the first place, but remember, we are already in excess of 29-1. I guess to that they'd say, socialist idiot thinks we should build more homes when we already have too many, so there's no winning. So, subsidies aren't free. Where are we going to get the money to pay for this thing? Well, unless you believe in modern money theory like Alan Greenspan,
there's nothing to prevent the federal government from creating as much money as it wants and paying it to somebody. The United States can pay any debt it has because we can always print money to do that. So there is zero probability of default.
Ben Bernanke,
the banks have accounts with the Fed much the same way that you have an account in a commercial bank. So to lend to a bank, we simply use the computer to mark up the size of the account that they have with the Fed. It's much more akin to printing money than it is to borrowing.
And me, you don't think that the government can afford anything that it wants to purchase. Pretty obviously, we can get money from this market over here. After all, the houses in this market are taking up resources like lumber and labor and drywall that could be used for housing the homeless. If we keep this investment market untouched, the price of all these goods needed to build the homes would increase, and we would need to pay a lot more for our subsidy or not be able to build the homes at all from a lack of resources. We could put a price control on this market, or, even better, whatever our subsidy costs us to operate, that's how much this other market is taxed. Additionally, a vacancy tax, a tax on any housing unit that isn't currently being lived in, could be implemented that would make it much more costly to hold on to homes in the first place and discourage future construction of unnecessary homes. This scheme has the added benefit that as people move up in society and start to earn more money, the need for the subsidy will decrease, and with it, the amount being taxed. Perfect. So hopefully I've convinced all of you watching that a market-based solution to the housing crisis is possible and actually quite easy. That being said, I do want you to question the system that produced the housing crisis in the first place. Solutions like these will always be bandages, treating the symptoms and not the cause, but they will help people who are suffering right now. Never forgo progress for the sake of utopia, I guess is what I'm trying to say. I hope the rest of the day is the best of your day.